Hey guys, my name is Haley, and today I destroyed my shelves for the videos that I need to film, so let's hope this was worth it. But hello, today I'm going to be filming what's kind of an old school booktube video, and that is like the Booktube Newbie tag essentially, which I decided to redo. One, because I'm pretty sure I deleted my original one because I hated the footage so much. Mainly for the fact that I, if you didn't know, have been on Booktube for about 8 years. I think my 8 years was this year in April. Yeah, I uploaded my first video in April of 2016, which is wild to think about. And I was like pretty consistent on Booktube for several years. And then I left my cults and filmed a little bit here and there as I was trying to reframe my life, and then disappeared off of here for like 2+ years as I like had to figure out basically my whole life again after leaving said cult. So I am essentially hoping to film a Booktube newbie tag in case there are other people, or even people who are newer to Booktube who are having trouble finding new or certain creators. Because I, more than anyone, have been on here for 8 years, and I've been at 500 subscribers for most of those years, like 6+ of those years, which I know it's because the algorithm hates me because I was gone for 2 years, but also it's depressing sometimes not seeing any growth. So I am hoping that this will help boost it a little bit. So for number one, if you didn't know, one of the easiest ways to boost the algorithm on somebody's video is to leave a comment, even if it's just emojis. Like, go leave some pumpkin emojis in the comments down below. I'm guilty of it. I forget to comment on people's videos all the time because a lot of the time I'm more listening to YouTube than watching it, and I'm not always by it to like comment on it. So we're trying here, but I wanted to do a little bit of a flip on the regular Booktube newbie tag because I have done that before, and I saw somebody do one that was like 20 of my favorite book recommendations based on these questions. So I copied down all of those questions. I will leave the creator I saw do this in the comment in the doobly-doo down below, but I thought I would just answer all these questions because I feel like even if I had kept the Booktube newbie tag up that wasn't atrociously filmed, a lot of my like opinions and everything have changed, as well as like favorites. So I figured this would be a good way to update you on what I've been reading the last couple years as well while I was gone. So let's jump right into those questions. I believe there's 20 of them. And the first question is, what books got you into reading? Which I think is a regular Booktube newbie tag question. And the answer for that is Harry Potter, which was written by She Who Must Not Be Named, or as Joey Richter likes to say from Star Kid, Harry Potter, which was written by no one. I also appreciate from the Star Kid fans that Harry Potter was written by Darren Criss. All of the above. But like everyone and their mother, especially millennial-wise, Harry Potter is what got me into reading. I read them when I was very, very young. I was probably like 10 when I started reading them and catching up as the movies came out with Prisoner of Azkaban. But if you didn't know, I did theater back in my like late teens, early 20s, and during that time I didn't read anything at all, simply because I literally didn't have time between school and theater. So the book that got me back into reading after that was Divergent. So that series holds a very, very special place in my heart because I read so much apocalypse and like apocalyptic like YA at that time because I missed that whole train while I was doing theater. And then right after I left my church, and this is a big period that was not documented on this channel, I started reading romance, like more dark romance and like BDSM and that type of like heavier romance, not just cute, fluffy, like clean romance as was recommended by my church. So I spent about 2 years reading just straight up romance with like a horror here and there. And then I have recently gotten back into my horror kick in the last like month or two. So as someone who grew up on like scary stories to tell in the dark and like Courage the Cowardly Dog, horror has always been one of my favorites, but that leads into the next question. And that is, what book genre do you read the most? I definitely read a lot of horror. I don't read as many thrillers because I'm a little bit pickier with thrillers. I don't like domestic thrillers a lot of the time, but I do read a lot of horror. I used to read so much fantasy because that was like okay for me to read because my church wasn't super strict against fantasy or like Harry Potter like a lot of churches were, which is bizarre. I also, my go-to if I just need fast reads is paranormal, and I've read a lot of romance in the last couple of years. So I would say like paranormal and horror are my big ones, and then I would say romance. And then I've been getting back into fantasy with the wonderful world of romantasy that has started in the last couple of years. And then question number 3 is, what genre do you read the least? And that is definitely historical fiction. I have read some historical fiction here and there, but it is not my favorite by any means. And like I said, domestic thrillers, not my thing. Like, what's it called? The Woman in the Window. All of those like big title thrillers that you see like at the airport or at front and center at Target, like those are not the thrillers that I like. I will say one of my favorite thriller authors is John Mars, which I had a whole video of his that like went off and like became relatively popular when I was gone from this channel. So whatever genre he is considered, almost like a sci-fi-esque thriller, those are the type of thrillers that I tend to like. And then when it comes to nonfiction, it has to be a subject that I really, really, really am interested in. Otherwise, I probably won't read it. And when I do when I do read nonfiction, I do tend to listen to it on audio. And then question number 4, what book do you tell everybody is your favorite? I don't know that I've ever definitively given anybody a favorite other than like Harry Potter over the years, which I don't say that anymore for obvious reasons. So I have multiple answers to this. Number 1 is my go-to answer is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. This book is a million pages long. It is mixed media. It's the reason, it was actually my introduction to mixed media, I think, other than Illuminae, which if you've read this book is an undertaking. It has like pages that are written sideways or pages with like 2 words on it or things like that. And as I always say, the reason this book is my favorite, it is one of the few books in my lifetime that has actually scared the crap out of me. So yeah, I think I read this in 2019, 2018, somewhere in there. Definitely when I was still active on Booktube, and it has remained my favorite. I would love to reread it, but again, because it's such an undertaking, that is a big ask for someone who doesn't reread very often. But this is a go-to for my favorite book. Another one I said for years that I might stand by if I reread it now is The Book of M. This is one of the weirdest like apocalypse books that I've ever read, and I've read a lot of them. And I vividly remember the ending of this getting such a big visceral reaction out of me, so that is another go-to I've said. One of my new go-tos is Criminal Intentions, which you'll hear me mention several times throughout this video. This is a very, very, very underrated series about 2 police officers, and as someone who hates, here's another genre I don't read, is crime thrillers. Don't like them. I've read a couple and I'm like, oh, maybe I'll no. Anything that has to do with police or the military, absolutely not for me. But when it comes to this one, this deals with a lot of the commentary that I feel like is necessary surrounding the police force. This is also about 2 gay men as they become partners over this overarching storyline that goes on through the million books that are in this series. And there's also a lot of, neither of these men are white. Neither of them are like naturally born American. Like one is a Korean, his family is Korean immigrants, and the other one is, I believe he's Iranian. And seeing both of those cultures represented as well as their identities of Malcolm has always like identified as queer, but he used to be married to a woman and is no longer, and is sleeping with a bunch of men before he meets Sanjay. And then Sanjay is very, very, very staunchly ace, and he has to explain it constantly to people that his specific way of explaining how he interacts with the asexual spectrum, which I wholeheartedly appreciated in this book and this whole series. And seeing their relationship over time develop, as well as all the commentary on the issues with the police force in America while following serial killer cases. I will never not recommend the series to anyone. I think my favorite is like book 6 or 7. There are 30 plus books in this series, and it is not finished because people were mean to the author and he disappeared off the internet for a while. So I'm really upset about that. But this is by far become probably my favorite book of all time, but I do try not to recommend it because it's a series. And then the other book that I have said for a long time as my favorite is this stack right here because I collect multiple editions of it, and that is A Wrinkle in Time. This is the edition I almost stole from my middle school library, but I hunted down the copy of it because there's a million covers of these books because they're from like the 80s. Oh god, not even the 80s, they're from the 60s. And I hunted down this cover because this is the one that I read. And then also the sequel to it, which is A Wind in the Door. These books they're not technically sequels. They are companions set in the same world. And then, again, I have a million covers of A Wrinkle in Time. I have a couple of A Wind in the Door because A Wind in the Door was my favorite for a long time. I've never seen this one. I was so excited to find it. And then the other copy of A Wind in the Door. They are technically middle grade, but I feel like they are like high sci-fi middle grade that verges more on YA, which is what we would probably consider it today, despite the age technically of the characters. Yes, A Wrinkle in Time has been a favorite of mine for a very, very long time. And then the next question is, what book have you reread the most? The answer to that is technically Harry Potter, Who Must Not Be Named. So I'm going to go with A Wrinkle in Time. I've reread this book upwards of like 6 or 7 times, if not more, when I was a child because I did not track my reading back then. Yeah, as someone who read the Harry Potter series like 10 times through, Wrinkle in Time is the closest thing I have to that. And then the next question is, what is a book that everyone else loved that you didn't? If you're a book talk girly, look away. The number one factor of this, and I read it twice to make sure, and I just don't like it. And that is ACOTAR. Not an ACOTAR fan. I read the first 2. I thought Court of Mist and Fury was a solid book. I like Reese. I can't stand Farah. I don't really like Sarah J. Maas's writing. I have no interest in any of her books. I know that's an unpopular opinion. But yeah, when it comes to like a book everybody else loved but you didn't, this is my number one. And then my second one that I also is a beloved one is someone who has read a lot of romance, and people who love romance love these. I tried to read Twisted Love by Anna Huang. I hated it. I hated the male main character so much. I thought he was so annoying, and I couldn't do it. So yeah, those are my number 2 of book everybody else loved that I did not like. The next question is a book that definitely deserves the hype. I'm on the hype train for this one. I understand. I was super skeptical when I finally went and got this after the hype train had already started. And then I couldn't find it anywhere, so I bought the ebook and then didn't find the physical book until months later. So I don't have the sprayed edges. I will say I am of the unpopular opinion that I liked Iron Flame just as much as this one. But this one 100% deserves the hype for all the reasons. And then another one that definitely deserves the hype is The House in the Cerulean Sea. This, I always say, is the book that captures the, like, humor, like dark, cynical humor of Star Kid the best that I've ever encountered, which is a very niche thing to say as someone who's loved Star Kid for like 15 years. Something about the humor in this just like fits Star Kid's humor so well, and that has become my humor because I've been experiencing it since I was like 14 years old. But I love this book. Another book I would love to reread, but both of them absolutely deserve the hype. Next question is a book that you read the fastest. I don't even have an answer for this because I read really fast. I always have. Like, definitely I've gotten faster as I've gotten older, but like, it is not a rare occurrence for me to read a book in a day or in a couple of hours. That's pretty common for me, actually, for my reading habits now. Because a lot of the time I won't read at all during the work week, and then I'll just read like 4 books on the weekend, and that's how my reading happens a lot of the time now. I will say one of the first books that I definitely read as fast as humanly possible for how huge it is Deathly Hallows, which is the last Harry Potter book. I got that book at midnight at Barnes & Noble. Started reading it in the car with like a little nightlight, stayed up all night, finished it by probably like 6 or 7 in the morning. That's probably one of the fastest times I've ever read a book. That's the only one that comes to mind that sticks out. And then we have the next question, which is a book that deserves more hype. So many of my books deserve more hype. One of them definitely being Criminal Intentions, which I've already mentioned. But I'm going to go with The Spirit Bears Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White. This is about a queer trans boy in the 1800s who gets sent to a sanatorium, and it is also paranormal and it has ghosts. And made me sob my eyes out. This is also an exception to the historical fiction that I just said I didn't like. Apparently, if it's queer, I'm okay with it, especially if it's queer and paranormal. And then another book that I've literally never heard anyone talk about, which saddens me, and that is Dayspring by Anthony Oliveira. This is a biblical retelling of if Jesus and John the Beloved were queer and together. That is why I picked it up. I've also annotated and tabbed the absolute crap out of it, and I probably will do more. I will say this book is not for everyone because it is not told in any sort of linear format. It's also told in like verse with like the red text for Jesus, like the Bible. And it's also told in different like timelines almost. Like there are some timelines that set back in actual biblical times of Jesus and John. And then there are some timelines that are set as if Jesus and John were like teenagers in like the early 2000s. So this book is very nonsensical and not for everyone, but if you can get through the writing style, it has such good commentary on the Bible, which is my favorite thing, and is also gay. I've been calling this the gay Jesus book since I read it, and I'm obsessed with it. And some people are very offended by that, and if you are, you're in the wrong place because this is going to be on my favorite books of the year. And then the next question is a book you usually recommend when people ask for recommendations. For me, I will ask them a million questions on what genres they like or they think they might like based on like movies or TV shows they watch if they don't really read at all. But when it comes to fantasy, me and everyone else agree. Fourth Wing is a go-to recommendation. I think most people will like this. If you want to get into paranormal and or dark romance, Her Soul to Take was one of my very first dark romances. It has a whole page of trigger warnings, which scares a lot of people, but is much appreciated when getting into any dark romance. But this is about a girl who has a YouTube channel, and she goes to an abandoned building and wants to summon a demon and hopes to get some spooky footage, and accidentally summons a real demon, which she didn't think existed, and it's their romance. And it's very dark and very twisted and messed up. Another spicy romance I'm a really big fan of is Shenny by Rebecca Weatherspoon. This is about a girl who has to marry a guy to get an inheritance from a dead relative of hers, and they have to remain married for a certain period of time. They've never met, they don't know each other, they have no idea why her relative decided to do this, but they're both just like, I guess I can do that for that much money. And it has a lot of switching involved in the spicy scenes, so there's a lot of femdom, and there's also a lot of male sub and a lot of things like that, but they also are both switches, so the spice in this is fantastic. And then if you are a big fan of the TV show, like specifically the BBC Sherlock, I wholeheartedly, and you want a more queer version of that, I highly recommend the Dead series by Vaughn Cassidy. I binged the crap out of this series earlier this year, and it is everything I want in a paranormal series. It is about this man who goes to a bar. He doesn't really go out. He's kind of an introvert. He doesn't really like people. He goes out to a bar, he is sipping his drink with his coworkers, and he chokes to death on an ice cube. And when he is being revived by the paramedics, he realizes the next day when he goes into work that he can see ghosts. And the first ghost he ever sees is the person of the autopsy he's performing of a dead drag queen. And the story goes from there. The next question is a book you thought you would hate, but you ended up loving. This is an author that I spent years hearing about, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to like that. I remember when her first book came out, and I was like, I don't think that's for me. And I was wrong. And that is Allie Hazelwood, specifically The Love Hypothesis. I remember when this book came out, and it was everywhere, and I was like, I don't think that author is for me. Earlier this year, if you've been around here for a minute, I binged all of Allie Hazelwood's book in the span of like 2 weeks. This is the first one. It might still be my favorite of hers, except for it's between this one and Check and Mate. I was a really big fan of that one too. So yeah, I thought I would never like this book, and I was wrong. It was incorrect. And then we have a book that made you cry. The two hard hitters for this year are Stay Gold by Tobley McSmith. This is a YA about a trans teenage boy who goes to a new school in Texas. I sobbed my eyeballs out. And the other one is the one that hit way, way, way too close to home for me that I got to ARC read for the author because I found her on Bookstagram. And that is Gay the Pray Away by Natalie Naudus. This is about a religious Christian cult and about a teenage girl who grew up in this cult is starting to question a lot of things the older that she gets. About like, why do women have to be so subservient? Because this new girl also comes to town and joins their church, and she's very obviously not a part of their religion. And she starts to have some complicated feelings about this girl and realizes she may not be straight, and so she goes, one of my favorite parts of this is she goes to the library and tries to find queer books, but she knows her parents would never allow her to own them, so she like rips off the cover of the book and hides it in the cover of like a Bible or another biblical based book and reads it at nighttime with a like flashlight. It's such an important read for so many people, and I'm not going to cry talking about it. I've cried on camera talking about this several times this year. If you haven't read it, if you have any religious trauma, tread carefully with this, but I think it's such an important read and more people need to read it. A book you wish you could read again for the first time. Honestly, for me, that would be An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. I had been like anticipating this quite a bit because I love Hank Green. I've followed the Vlogbrothers for years since I've been watching YouTube for like, I don't know, 10 to 12 years now. I've read all of John Green's books. Like, I was really excited for Hank to come out with one, especially it was sci-fi. I was in a big sci-fi kick. I loved this book so much. I love the main character. I love the storyline of like the aliens come to Earth. I love the first contact story. I loved this. And it was one of my first experiences with a main character. What is her name? Right, her name is April May. Of a main character who is so messy, but that doesn't make her any less of a great character. I feel like it humanizes her as opposed to a lot of other like younger fiction where like the main character can do no wrong. That is not the case with her, and I adored this. The next question is a book that has your favorite characters in it. I absolutely will go with Malcolm and Songjae. This is the second one. Who are the main characters in Criminal Intentions? They're definitely up there. But another set of my main characters in a book that might be my favorite of the year, I haven't decided yet, is the main characters from Godly Heathens. There is Jem, who is our main character, who is non-binary and goes by they, them pronouns, who I just loved, and is also a very, very messy main character. And then in an earlier video this year, I mentioned that I'm not really someone who gets like fictional crushes. One of the love interests in this, because it has like a poly sort of thing happening in it, is Enzo, who is a gay man who lives in New York City, who Jem chats with a lot on like video chat. I was swooning every time that Enzo was on page, so there's that. Question number 15 is a book world you wish you could live in. Someone who reads quite a bit of fantasy and sci-fi. Most of them are super dangerous and I want nothing to do with that. So the one I chose is an old childhood favorite of mine, and that is Pendragon, because this is essentially just a portal fantasy, but I would pick it after Bobby Pendragon has saved the world and the portals are still open. And before all of the chaos of Hala happens. Next question is a book that could cure a reading slump, and I just picked the one that cured one of the worst reading slumps I've had in a minute, which was last year. I believe it was like right before last fall, and that is Broken Bonds by Jay Bree. This is what got me into why choose romances, especially why choose with paranormal creatures or gods and goddesses. I was deathly ill last fall, and this book, I read this entire 6-book series, and they are not short books at all. They're all way too long, but I ate up every second of it in the like week and a half I was sick. But I definitely think this could get anyone out of a reading slump if any of that is your jam. And then one of the last questions is a book that everyone should read at least once in their life. I do want to go with House in the Cerulean Sea for this one too, as far as a fiction book goes. I have quite literally never come across anybody who didn't like this that read it. It's not everybody's favorite, but everybody I've seen read it really, really enjoyed it. And I think this is very accessible to most people. But if I actually wanted to pick one that a lot of people would get a lot out of to understand people who go through things like sexual assault especially, I would say Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is the girl who was involved in the Brock Turner case, if we all remember that, several years ago. And this book broke me. It's so sad and so depressing, but also so empowering from a woman perspective. But what she had to go through was not okay. And the way our criminal justice system treats things like rape and protecting white males in particular is not okay. Especially when the person that was assaulted is a person of color. It's all a big conversation, this, and I feel like more people need to read it, even if it's to gain some empathy for people that are in this situation. Except we have a book that would make a great movie. I think The Invocations by Crystal Sutherland would be a fantastic paranormal movie about witches. And it has a lot of queer rep in it. I feel like this would do really, really well if somebody got the rights for it and like released it in like September for like spooky season. And as we're seeing all the queer like movies and stuff take place as of the last couple of years, I think this would be a great pick for a movie. And the second to last question is, what is a book that you wish everyone would give a shot, even if it's outside of their comfort zone? And to that I say Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. This book is so humorous, but also deals with such heavy topics of the concept of burying your gaze, which is a thing in Hollywood, of people wanting to kill off queer characters, and there's no queer joy involved in a lot of movies or TV shows that come out of the big blockbuster type studios. This is also just a really, really fun way to do a slasher with a little bit of sci-fi thrown in. I love this, and I think more people need to pick it up. And the last question is, what is a book you will never forget? For that one, I'm going to go with The Wind in the Door. This one stuck with me, even though I've read Wrinkle in Time more times. This is a story that I read as a small child. For reference, I was not religious as a child. I entered into religion or was coerced into religion as a young adult. And one of the main characters in this, which I didn't even realize until way later in life, is a biblically accurate angel, as you might be able to tell from the cover. And this book has stuck with me throughout the years. But another random one I wanted to talk about, because I never got the chance to talk about it very much here on Booktube, is Burn Our Bodies Down by Rory Power. When I read this, I went around the internet and asking everyone I could possibly think of if anybody else could tell this was a Cain and Abel retelling. And everybody was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, am I the only one that sees this? And then like years and years later, I ended up messaging Rory Power while she was on a book tour for one of her more recent books, because this idea had stuck in my brain that I was the only one who saw the Cain and Abel retelling part of it. And she was like, I actually like briefly thought about that, but you were the only person who has ever pointed that out. And I was like, really? So yeah, there's a slight Cain and Abel retelling towards the end of this, and I would love to reread and annotate and like dissect it for that reason alone. So I will never forget this book for that reason. But yeah, I am not going to try to hold up that stack of books while also holding the mic. That would end in disaster. But I hope you all enjoyed this. If you are new to my channel, please leave a ghost emoji in the comments down below if you made it this far. If you've been here for a while and you enjoyed this update, leave... what's a good one? Leave like the blood drop emoji. Do non-iPhone users have that one? If they're the blood drop or like a vampire or something like that in the comments down below, because I'm curious. But I hope you all enjoyed this. Thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.